Hi, I'm Berno and I'm doing Thought for the Week with you today, this week. And yesterday we looked at what it means to be created in God's image. Now, if you haven't seen yesterday's video, please go and watch that first, because then today will make a lot more sense, because they all link in together. The other thing is, if there's anything I say that you really like, or you think, oh, that's a bit funny or a bit strange, or you want to disagree, I'd love to hear from you. So, let me know in the comments what you think, because I love keeping this conversation going. It's really good. But yeah, so yesterday we looked at Genesis 1 and being created in God's image and what that means, and kind of reflecting a bit more on that, but also recognizing that when we compare Genesis 1 with how humanity is going today, there's something terribly wrong. It's not going in a very good way. For instance, before COVID happened, in England particularly, the news was generally about Brexit and the climate crisis that's going on. It's about rulers flexing their powers, and also the environment that is just under a strain because of humanity's activity and impact. But more recent events have also highlighted how racism is still deeply embedded in our society, and we're sometimes not even aware of it. But here's the thing: discrimination is not just based on race. It's gender, social standing, religious belief, sexual orientation, health, age. There's a whole array, cultural background. Really, it's anyone that's different or in the minority or even inconvenient, that faces some form of oppression or discrimination. And really, it's in Genesis 3 where we find out why this is and why humanity is in such a big mess. And this is personal, because you and we're contributing to this as well. And we do not always like to admit it, but it's true. So what goes wrong? Now, I hope you're all familiar with Genesis 3. If not, just pause this video, grab a Bible, or just Google Genesis 3 and read through that. So what happens beforehand is that Adam and Eve is created, and then God gives Adam, he says to Adam, right, we're in this garden together, you can eat of everything, but there's this one tree you're not allowed to eat of. And if you do, you will surely die. And so when we get to Genesis 3, that's where things go wrong. Now there's someone else involved in this process, and it's portrayed as a serpent in Genesis 3, and really this is an adversary of God whose intention is to disrupt what God is doing. And so what's really interesting is the way that the serpent presents God's truth and God's command to Eve. He approaches Eve and he brings it in a slightly different angle, and then at one point completely contradicts what God says. But what is really interesting is that there's something about eating the fruit that makes becoming like God for humanity really attractive. I don't know how long, the Bible doesn't say how long Adam and Eve, have been spending in the garden with God, but it was definitely long enough for the idea to become like God to be a temptation. So, after the serpent makes his presentation really about this fruit and challenges a bit what God says, Eve looks at it, and this is really interesting. She looks at it, and it appeals to her physical nature. In Genesis, it says it looks pleasing to the eye. It satisfies a need. It is food, and then it's presented in a way that will really make her feel good about herself. It'll give her wisdom. And so right from the start here in Genesis, we get already the idea of what areas of human nature is weak to temptation. And you know what a really modern phrase for this would be? Categories of sex, money, and power. So Eve, she succumbs to temptation. She digs in and she gives it to Adam, who's right there by her. And it's at this moment that humanity becomes aware of evil by participating in evil. And so that's where things go bad. And so when they become aware of that, they hide, and God confronts them, and he asks Adam, what's going on? Why are you hiding from me? And suddenly they are playing this blame game, and blaming one after the other, which we still play that today, don't we? We love it. It's not my fault, it's this person. And then God explains to Adam and Eve, and really it's the consequences for the rest of humanity. Because of what they've done, this is the consequences. And also to the serpent, to God's adversary, there's consequences for him as well. And humanity, Adam and Eve, they have to leave Eden. They have to leave the place which is filled with God's presence, and it's the place of everlasting and perfect life. And so from that moment onwards, humanity is separated from the Creator, from the one whose image we are supposed to be reflecting. And then things, when we get to the next chapter, things just go from bad to worse. Adam and Eve have 2 sons, and one of them becomes jealous of his brother, and he's so jealous that he murders his brother. That's the first documented place of murder in the Bible. And then a few chapters later, and a few generations later, there's a horrible event where God looks at humanity and how bad people have become, that he actually regrets putting people on earth. And then this results in an act of God that completely wipes out pretty much all of humanity. And it's such a terrible event, and yet today we sing children's songs about it, and we have games and children's book about this event. But if we look at today, and a lot of people think there's this idea that as humans we've progressed, particularly in the past 300 years, through the knowledge and understanding we've gained, and through reasoning, and how the development of science and all these things are making people actually much better. The trouble is, we're still not any better at treating other people really good. The way we're treating people is an absolute mess. The wars and things going on is just terrible. There's a travel documentary I watched a few years ago, and these guys described that the greatest danger for their travel was other people. Nature poses its own threats, but really it was people that they were most concerned of. And do you know what? Guess who's there to encourage us to fall in temptation? It's God's adversary. The Bible talks about Satan, which is Hebrew for adversary. And he's there ready to let us fall to temptation. Jesus' half-brother, he writes to in his only letter to the early church, the early Christians, that it is our human desires that are being tempted by evil. And really this sin, and this is what we call sin, this sin ultimately leads to death. And Paul also writes that the wages of sin is death. And that's something as Christians we're very familiar with, aren't we? And yet we still get caught out with it. And also, we need to be more aware, really. This is the thing. As people, we need to be more aware of our own temptations and our own weaknesses and our own sin. We really need to be aware of that. And also, we have to be aware of how God feels about sin. And if you just look at the book of Leviticus, for instance, you really see there's some strong wording being used with how God feels about sinful behavior. But anyway, tomorrow we will look a bit more at Leviticus. But let's pray. Lord, sin is not a difficult topic to necessarily think about or reflect on. But it's just such a big part of our nature, and we can see the way it's affecting the world. And so, as Christians, we really want to reflect your image better. But the only way we can do that is to be aware of where we fall short, where we miss the mark of reflecting you. And so I pray that you will help us to acknowledge the things we do wrong, because we want to come to you again, and we want to reflect you, because that is how you made us. That is the role you have given us as humans. Amen. Now, John, one of Jesus' disciples, he wrote in his first letter that if we deny the sin in our lives, we're deceiving ourselves, and actually the truth of God is not in us. So we have to be aware of this. Now, tomorrow we'll look at Leviticus, and actually things will start getting a bit better. Catch you in the next video.